Elias Ward leaned against the cold metal railing of the orbital repair station, watching the distant stars streak by as ships passed in silent procession. He had worked here for years, fixing vessels that no one else would touch. Humans were considered minor players in the galaxy, useful only for maintenance, salvage, or risky missions that others refused. That suited Elias fine. He didn't care about status, politics, or the endless power games that seemed to control other species. His work spoke for itself, and it had kept him alive more times than he could count. The station's alarms went off with a shrill beep, breaking the calm hum of the docking bays. A voice called over the intercom. "Emergency docking request. Unknown vessel, Class 0. Clearance granted." Elias raised an eyebrow. Class 0 ships were extremely rare. They were reserved for royalty, ancient artifacts, or vessels with secrets that could shift entire empires. Curious, he grabbed his toolkit and headed toward the docking bay. When the airlock opened, the sight that met him was breathtaking and terrifying at the same time. A massive warship, sleek and unlike anything human engineering had ever produced, floated in the bay. Its surface shimmered with strange, organic patterns, and the edges seemed to bend light in ways that defied simple explanation. Around it hovered a small fleet of escorts, silent and precise, gliding like predators. At the center of all this was a single, imposing figure. The queen of the Varelian swarm. Elias had read about the Varelians in old data archives. They were one of the oldest species in known space, feared for their rigid traditions, their nearly mystical technology, and their unyielding approach to life. They were not cruel in the sense humans understood. They were precise, logical, and relentless. And they were not supposed to need human help. Ever. But here she was, flanked by her elite guards, inside a warship that looked more alive than machine. Something was very wrong. Elias was led through the ship's corridors, which seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. He caught glimpses of glowing panels and alien symbols, none of which he recognized, but his trained eye immediately noticed irregularities. The Queen's ceremonial armor was laid out before him, carefully protected. But her helmet, the one piece that regulated her life functions and bound her body to the ship, had been damaged. A jagged crack ran along the main dome, and faint sparks flickered from its energy conduits. He swallowed and approached the helmet. The Queen herself remained seated, serene and regal, her many eyes studying him with intensity. There was no fear in her gaze, only a sharp, almost cold, interest. Elias could feel the weight of that gaze pressing against him, and he felt a tiny thrill of both fear and fascination. "Can it be repaired?" one of the translators asked on his behalf. The words were simple, but Elias understood the stakes instantly. This was no ordinary repair. If he failed, it would not be just the helmet that suffered. The Queen's life, her very survival, was in his hands. Elias crouched beside the device. "I'll try," he said, his voice steady, though his fingers itched with tension. "But I need full access." The guards nodded, allowing him to work, though their silence was oppressive. Elias set to work using the human tools he carried: soldering equipment, fine wire, and improvised sensors. The technology was unlike anything he had ever touched. It responded to bioelectric signals, adjusting its own circuits to the user's intent, but even that couldn't fix structural damage. He had to improvise. To think like the helmet itself, not just the machine around it. Hours passed. Time in space stations was measured differently, but Elias barely noticed. He was fully absorbed, weaving together strands of alien tech with human ingenuity. When he finally connected the last conductor, the helmet hummed softly, as if breathing. Sparks stopped flickering. The life support system stabilized. "Done," he whispered to no one in particular. The Queen moved forward with measured grace, her eyes narrowing in examination. Elias held his breath. She extended her hand and carefully lifted the helmet, fitting it over her head. There was a pause, an almost imperceptible pause where the entire ship seemed to hold its breath. Then the helmet system synchronized perfectly with her biosigns. The Queen spoke. Her voice, translated, was a single word: Groom. Elias froze. He looked around, expecting someone to correct the translator or explain what had just happened. But no one did. The silence was heavy. "What does that mean?" he finally asked. A translator technician stepped forward, almost trembling. "It is correct. The Queen has addressed you as Groom." Elias blinked. "Groom? What kind of title is that?" "In Varelian culture," explained the translator slowly, "the word had nothing to do with marriage. It referred to an ancient role known as the one who prepares the crown, a figure whose duty was to protect the ruler and ensure the continuity of the monarchy. This role had been ceremonial for centuries, and no outsider, no human or alien, had ever been called by it. Elias's heart skipped a beat. By repairing the helmet, he had unknowingly performed a ritual that the Varelians had considered sacred for over 1,000 years. He had crossed a line that no human had ever crossed. The Queen's eyes studied him, sharp and calculating. Her many attendants and guards shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. From that moment, Elias realized that he had not just fixed a machine. He had become part of something far larger, something political, cultural, and dangerous. Over the next hours, he was questioned, examined, and watched. Every gesture he made was noted, every tool he used scrutinized. Yet, despite the scrutiny, he remained calm. Human beings had a way of surviving in unexpected situations, he thought, because they relied not on tradition or rigid rules, but on improvisation, creativity, and courage. The Queen moved among her guards, addressing him occasionally, each time repeating the word, Groom. To her people, it was a declaration. To Elias, it was confusing. But he began to understand. She did not see him as a subordinate or a simple mechanic. She saw him as someone vital to her survival, someone essential to her role as a ruler. As night fell over the station, a concept that seemed meaningless in orbit, Elias realized he would not be allowed to leave. The Queen would not travel without him present, and the ritual he had completed required his presence. He was both honored and trapped, a human witness to the deepest traditions of an alien empire. In the following days, as he learned more about the Varelians, Elias noticed something remarkable. Their technology was advanced, yes, but rigid. Their ships, their weapons, their entire culture relied on tradition and hierarchy. Humans, in contrast, were unpredictable, inventive, and unbound by centuries of rigid rules. By acting without fear, without concern for rank, Elias had done what no Varelian engineer could. He had fixed the impossible. Other species began to take notice. Rumors spread across the station. Humans were clever, yes. But one human had just altered the traditions of a 1,000-year-old empire. Some were curious. Others were nervous. A few were openly hostile. Elias, however, focused on what mattered most, keeping the Queen alive and ensuring the helmet continued to function. The Queen, for her part, treated him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She did not command him, nor did she dismiss him. Instead, she allowed him to work, to observe, and to speak when necessary. She had recognized something that others often overlooked. Humans could survive and adapt in ways that were foreign to even the most advanced civilizations. Elias spent his days repairing minor systems on the Queen's ship, often accompanied by her attendants, who watched with fascination. He found himself explaining simple concepts in simple terms, teaching the alien engineers human approaches to problem-solving, improvisation, and flexibility. Slowly, he began to understand their technology, not by tradition, but by function. One evening, as he adjusted a delicate energy conduit, the Queen approached. "You understand our machines," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate. Elias nodded. "I understand how they work," he replied. "But sometimes, a machine is more than metal. It has to feel alive." respond to problems in ways its creators never imagined. That's what I do. The Queen's eyes glimmered. In that moment, Elias realized that he had done more than repair a helmet. He had bridged two worlds: human ingenuity and alien tradition, chaos and order, survival and ritual. And in doing so, he had unknowingly changed the galaxy's perception of humanity. By the time he returned to his quarters on the station, exhaustion weighed him down, but his mind raced. He was not just a repairman, he was a participant in history, a human who had stepped beyond the boundaries of his species and demonstrated something extraordinary. And somewhere in the distance, across the stars, the word Groom echoed in his mind, a reminder that actions, no matter how small or practical, could have consequences far beyond their immediate purpose. He had fixed a helmet, yes, but in doing so, he had fixed something far more important: the fragile trust and understanding between two very different civilizations. Elias lay back, staring at the stars, and thought about what tomorrow might bring. He did not know the full consequences of his actions yet, but he felt certain that humans would be noticed from this day forward. For better or worse, the galaxy had just learned that humans were not to be underestimated. Elias woke to the soft hum of the Queen's ship as it drifted through the empty reaches of space. Days had passed since he repaired the helmet, yet the word Groom still echoed in his mind. It was not a title he understood fully, but it carried weight he could not ignore. Every member of the Queen's entourage treated him differently now, watching his every move, whispering in alien tones that he could not understand. Even the other humans on the station were keeping their distance, unsure how to deal with the attention of a being as powerful as the Varelian Queen. He made his way to the bridge, carrying a toolkit and a small tablet of diagnostic equipment. The Queen was already there, standing with her many attendants, scanning the stars with sharp precision. She did not speak to him immediately, but her gaze was fixed, waiting for him to begin. Elias understood this unspoken command. The helmet he had repaired had stabilized, but the Queen's life support systems were delicate and required constant attention. He had become, whether he wanted it or not, the keeper of her safety. As he checked the circuits and energy conduits, he noticed a problem. A minor instability in the helmet's power matrix could lead to failure if left unchecked. It was nothing the Queen's own engineers could not handle under normal circumstances, but the repairs he had made altered the system in ways only he understood. He adjusted the conduits, weaving in human ingenuity with alien precision. Sparks flickered briefly, then vanished, leaving the system running smoothly. The Queen's eyes softened slightly as she watched. Elias felt a small measure of pride. In a world where humans were often overlooked or dismissed, his work mattered here. It mattered more than he had ever imagined. But with that pride came responsibility. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was part of something far larger, a living component in the survival of one of the oldest and most respected empires in the galaxy. Later, during a quiet moment, the Queen spoke in her soft, translated voice. "You do not follow our rules," she said. Elias glanced up from his work. "I follow what works," he replied simply. "If something is broken, I fix it. I do not worry about who wrote the rules or how long they have existed. If it matters, I find a way to make it work." The Queen considered his words carefully. "Humans are strange," she said finally, a statement that could be interpreted as praise or caution. "You do not fear consequences as we do. You do not hesitate when tradition demands inaction." Elias shrugged. "I do what needs to be done. It is not bravery. It is just necessary." That afternoon, a series of alerts rang across the ship. The Queen's advisors rushed to the bridge, speaking urgently in Varelian, their translated words heavy with tension. A fleet of unknown vessels had been detected approaching the station's vicinity. They were unmarked, moving quickly, and their formation suggested a coordinated strike rather than random travel. The Queen's expression remained calm, but Elias could see the tension in her posture. She turned to him. "Groom, observe and prepare." He nodded, understanding immediately. The word groom was more than a title now, it was a responsibility. His actions could determine not only the Queen's life but the stability of her fleet and the political balance of this entire sector. The approaching ships were strange in design, sharp and angular, unlike anything Elias had repaired before. Their shields pulsed with unfamiliar energy, and their weapon systems hummed in a way that suggested both precision and lethality. Humans might have panicked at such a sight. But Elias focused on analyzing patterns. He ran calculations in his head, predicting the enemy's maneuvers, and suggested defensive adjustments to the Queen's crew. To his surprise, the crew followed his guidance. Not because he was in command, but because the Queen had given him that implicit authority. "They react differently than we expected," Elias said, pointing to a display. "If we adjust the shield harmonics slightly and reroute auxiliary power to the forward conduits, we can absorb their first strike and maintain maneuverability." The Queen nodded, and her fleet executed the adjustments. When the enemy ships fired, Elias's prediction proved accurate. Their weapons struck the forward shields, which held firm, and the fleet remained intact. His human intuition had saved the day. The Queen's attendants whispered in amazement. No Varelian had ever done something like this before. Once the immediate threat passed, the Queen summoned Elias to a private chamber. She moved with grace, each step precise and deliberate, yet there was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity. "Humans are unpredictable," she said. "Your decisions saved my fleet today. No Varelian could have anticipated the attack as you did." Elias wiped sweat from his brow and tried to speak modestly. "I only did what I could see. I do not think like a Varelian, I think like a human. We improvise when the rules do not help." She studied him closely, her many eyes reflecting the soft glow of the chamber. Improvise. That is what the ancients relied on, long before the swarm became structured. Perhaps humans have not forgotten what we have lost. In the following days, news of Elias's actions spread beyond the immediate fleet. Other ships in nearby sectors reported the unusual presence of the human who had been called Groom by the Varelian Queen. Curious species began to observe, sending scouts, sending messages, and some even traveling to witness this anomaly firsthand. Humans, considered minor players, had suddenly demonstrated an ability that even the oldest civilizations could not match. The ability to see beyond tradition, to act decisively, and to solve problems others believed unsolvable. Elias continued his work, moving through the Queen's ship, repairing, adjusting, and advising where necessary. He found himself in constant communication with her engineers, teaching them not just techniques, but approaches. Humans approach systems differently creatively, without fear of breaking protocol or offending tradition. Slowly, Varelian engineers began to incorporate these methods, marveling at the results. During one particularly long repair session, the Queen approached him again. She was inspecting the same helmet he had fixed, noting subtle anomalies that might affect future functionality. "You do not fear responsibility," she said. "You accept risk without hesitation. That is rare among your species. Even if you think otherwise." Elias chuckled softly. "I do what needs to be done. Risk is just part of the job. It is not about courage. It is about survival and results." The Queen considered this, then nodded. "Perhaps that is why the ancients spoke of a groom, one who prepares the crown, who ensures the continuity of life and rule. You have fulfilled that role, though unknowingly. That is remarkable." Elias felt a mixture of pride and unease. He had never sought recognition, and yet his actions were reshaping the way an entire civilization viewed humans. The thought was both exhilarating and frightening. Then came the day of the diplomatic conference. Representatives from multiple species arrived at the station, curious and cautious. They had heard of the human who had repaired the Varelian Queen's helmet and had been given the ancient title. Some were skeptical, others wary. Elias was brought before the assembly, not as a servant, but as a witness and participant in the unfolding events. Questions were asked, and Elias answered simply and honestly. He explained how he had repaired the helmet, why he had acted as he did, and what principles guided him. He spoke of observation, patience, and adaptability. He spoke of improvisation when tradition failed. And he did not exaggerate or claim glory. He simply explained the truth. The assembly was stunned. No human had ever addressed a council of alien leaders in this manner. They expected excuses, arrogance, or fear. Instead, they were confronted with clarity, skill, and humility. The message was clear. Humans were not weak, and they were not insignificant. They were different, and in that difference lay power. By the end of the conference, the perception of humanity began to shift. Species who had once dismissed humans as minor players now regarded them as capable of remarkable feats. The Queen herself announced that the human known as Elias Ward would remain aboard her vessel in the role of Groom, not as a servant, but as a stabilizer, one who ensured the continuity of her life and, by extension, the stability of her empire. Elias accepted the role, though reluctantly. He had not sought influence, and he had no desire for power. But he understood the importance of his presence. By repairing a single helmet, he had stepped into a larger story, one that could shape the fate of civilizations. As the Queen's ship departed the station, gliding silently among the stars, Elias stood on the observation deck. He looked at the vast emptiness of space and felt a deep sense of responsibility. The galaxy had noticed humans now, not for their numbers, or their weapons, or their empires, but for their ability to act where others would hesitate, to see solutions where others saw obstacles, and to survive in ways others could not imagine. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the ship, the word Groom echoed once more, a reminder of the role he had been given, the responsibility he carried, and the new path that had been opened for humanity among the stars. For Elias Ward, it was clear. He would not simply survive. He would prove that humans, in their ingenuity, courage, and unpredictability, were a force to be reckoned with, capable of shaping history in ways the galaxy had yet to comprehend. And as the stars stretched out before him, he knew this was only the beginning. Elias spent the following days moving between the Queen's private chambers and the ship's bridge, checking systems, adjusting conduits, and consulting with her engineers. Each task seemed simple at first, but the deeper he delved into Varelian technology, the more he realized how differently they approached problem-solving. Their systems were elegant, efficient, and precise, but rigid. There was no room for improvisation, no allowance for unpredictability. Humans, by contrast, thrived on unpredictability. They could adapt, invent, and find solutions where rules failed. The Queen observed him quietly, as if measuring each movement, each decision. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words carried weight. "You do not act for glory," she said one morning. "You act because the work must be done. That is unusual." Elias smiled faintly. "It is not about being unusual. It is about getting results. If something needs fixing, I fix it. That is all." Despite his calm demeanor, tension hung in the air. Word of his actions had reached the wider galaxy, and not all attention was friendly. A coalition of rival species had begun sending scouts, observing the Queen's ship with suspicion. Some believed humans were manipulating the Varelians. Others feared that the Queen's newfound reliance on a human could destabilize centuries of tradition. It was during one of these observations periods that the first direct challenge arrived. A fleet of heavily armed warships, black and angular, appeared on the outskirts of the system. They did not respond to hails. Their weapons glimmered with an unfamiliar energy, and their formation suggested precision and intent. The Queen called Elias to the bridge. "They are here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Prepare the defenses." Elias immediately began analyzing the fleet. Their approach patterns were unfamiliar, their weapons systems unique. Most human pilots would panic in such a scenario. But he focused on observation. He noted the timing of their weapon pulses, the subtle oscillations in their shields, and the weak points in their formation. "We need to adjust the forward shield matrix," he said to the bridge crew. "Reroute power to the external stabilizers, and prepare the auxiliary conduits for rapid realignment. Their weapons will be most effective in a straight strike. We need mobility. We need mobility." The Queen nodded, issuing commands based on his instructions. Within minutes, the ship's shields adjusted, auxiliary power redistributed, and the fleet was ready for contact. When the enemy ships fired, Elias's predictions were correct. Their energy beams struck the expected points and were partially absorbed by the realigned shields. The Queen's fleet remained intact. Some of her attendants exchanged glances of disbelief. No Virelian engineer had anticipated the strike so accurately. It was human intuition, combined with careful observation, that had saved them. After the attack passed, the Queen called a private council. Representatives of the rival species were present, summoned by the unexpected arrival of a human who had altered the course of Virelian defense strategy. They were wary, some openly hostile. One of the alien delegates, a species known for their rigid hierarchy and political cunning, leaned forward. "Explain this human," they demanded. "How does he know our strategies? Why does the Queen rely on him?" The Queen's response was deliberate. "He is called Groom," she said. "He observes, he calculates. He acts when others hesitate. His actions ensure my safety and the continuity of my rule. That is all you need to know." The delegates were shocked. They had expected a servant or technician, not a human whose insight had saved an entire fleet. Some shifted uncomfortably, realizing that centuries of tradition could be disrupted not by war, but by ingenuity. Elias spoke calmly. "I do not seek power or influence. I do what is needed. Tradition can guide, but it should not bind. If something is broken, it must be fixed. That is all I have done." His words were simple, yet powerful. The assembly, composed of some of the galaxy's oldest and most sophisticated civilizations, fell silent. Humans, they realized, did not think like other species. They did not rely solely on rules or hierarchy. They relied on reason, observation, and adaptability. Over the next days, Elias worked tirelessly. He repaired minor systems on the Queen's ship, but he also began introducing new approaches to problem solving. He suggested ways to redistribute energy more efficiently, methods to improve shield responsiveness, and even structural adjustments to allow for faster maneuvering. Each suggestion was met with careful scrutiny by Virelian engineers, yet every adjustment proved effective. Word of his abilities spread beyond the Queen's immediate fleet. Other ships, nearby colonies, and even distant stations began to take note. Humans, once dismissed as minor players, were suddenly seen as capable of extraordinary feats. Their ingenuity, combined with fearlessness and adaptability, made them unpredictable, and that unpredictability could be more dangerous than any fleet of warships. One evening, as Elias adjusted a delicate power conduit, the Queen approached. She observed silently for a few moments, then spoke. "You understand machines in a way few Virelians can," she said. "But more than that, you understand people. You see potential, flaws, and solutions. That is why you succeed where others fail." Elias paused. "It is not about understanding people. It is about understanding problems. People, machines, systems, all of them can be broken. If you see the problem clearly, you can find the solution. That is all." The Queen studied him, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps humans are not meant to follow. Perhaps humans are meant to create, to change, to endure." Her words hung in the air as alarms suddenly rang. Another fleet had appeared, larger and more aggressive than the previous one. They moved with deliberate coordination, their weapons systems charged and ready. The Queen's fleet prepared for battle, and all eyes turned to Elias. He studied the approaching ships, noting every detail. Their shields, weapon frequencies, and formation patterns. He calculated angles of attack, escape routes, and the optimal deployment of auxiliary power. "We cannot meet them head-on," he said. "We need to outmaneuver them. Draw them into the system's gravity wells. Their formation will collapse under such conditions." The Queen nodded. "Do it," she commanded. Elias coordinated with the Varelian engineers, issuing precise instructions. Shields were shifted, engines adjusted, and the fleet moved as a single organism under his guidance. The enemy fleet pursued, confident in their superiority, only to find their formation disrupted by gravitational distortions. Beams misaligned, weapons overheated, and confusion spread among their ranks. By the time the enemy realized their disadvantage, the Queen's fleet had already executed a counterstrike, disabling several key ships without unnecessary loss of life. The Queen's attendants whispered in awe. Human ingenuity had turned the tide once again. After the engagement, the Queen addressed Elias privately. "You have proven yourself beyond what I imagined. Not only have you ensured my survival, but you have also demonstrated the potential of your species. Others will notice. Others will fear. Others will learn." Elias shook his head. "I do not want fear. I want understanding. Humans survive because we adapt. We do not dominate through fear or power. We survive through action and invention. That is all I can offer." The Queen considered this. "Perhaps that is why you are called Groom. You prepare the crown, not by force, but by wisdom and skill. You embody the qualities the swarm has lost over centuries. That is remarkable indeed." In the following weeks, Elias continued his work, teaching Varelian engineers new methods, observing fleets, and participating in diplomatic discussions. His role as Groom expanded beyond mere technical support. He became a bridge between cultures, a living example of how humans could contribute to civilizations far older and more powerful than their own. Other species began sending envoys to witness his actions. They observed how a human could analyze complex situations, adapt quickly, and achieve results that even the most seasoned Varelians could not. Some sought to learn from him, others to undermine him, but all were forced to acknowledge the human ability to act where others hesitated. Elias often reflected on his journey. He had started as a simple repairman, tasked with fixing a single helmet. Now, he was a key participant in interstellar diplomacy, a figure whose insight could determine the outcomes of fleets, alliances, and the stability of entire regions. He had not sought recognition, yet it had found him. He had not sought power, yet he wielded influence simply by being capable. And through it all, the word Groom remained a constant reminder of his role. Not a title of ownership, not a mark of subservience, but a recognition of responsibility, skill, and the unique perspective humans brought to the galaxy. Elias Ward, the human repairman, had become a symbol, not through conquest, not through force, but through the quiet power of ingenuity, adaptability, and the willingness to act where others would hesitate. As he stood on the observation deck one evening, watching the stars stretch into infinity, he understood something profound. Humans were underestimated, not because they were weak, but because their strength lay in ways no other species had yet comprehended. And if the galaxy wished to challenge humanity, they would find that humans were far more dangerous and far more remarkable than anyone had ever imagined. The galaxy had begun to take notice of Elias Ward. Word of the human who had repaired the Varelian Queen's helmet and outmaneuvered entire fleets had spread far beyond the Queen's fleet. Messages came from distant colonies, alien councils, and even rival species, all expressing curiosity, respect, or thinly veiled suspicion. Elias had never sought fame or recognition, but recognition had found him anyway. He walked through the Queen's ship, moving from one system to another, inspecting power conduits, checking shield matrices, and advising engineers. Each adjustment, each repair, was done with the calm precision of someone who had long accepted responsibility far beyond what most humans could imagine. The Queen followed him occasionally, silent, observing. She did not interfere, but her presence was a constant reminder of the gravity of his role. One morning, Alarms rang across the ship. The Queen's sensors had detected a massive fleet moving quickly through nearby space. They were heavily armed, and their approach suggested coordination and intent. These were no mere scouts or patrols. This fleet was meant to challenge the Varelian Queen's authority directly. Elias was immediately called to the bridge. The Queen's attendants looked tense, scanning the tactical displays. But Elias focused on analyzing the incoming fleet. Their movement patterns, weapon frequencies, and shield harmonics were unfamiliar. But he quickly identified weaknesses in their formation. "They will concentrate on the central ships first," he said, pointing to the display. "If we can redirect energy to the outer shields and use the gravity wells in this sector, we can break their formation before they reach us. Then, we can counter-strike with precision." The Queen nodded. "Do it." Elias coordinated with the ship's engineers, adjusting energy flows, rerouting auxiliary power, and preparing the fleet for rapid maneuvers. When the enemy ships fired, their beams struck the forward shields, just as he had predicted. Some penetrated, but the adjustments he had made absorbed most of the energy. The enemy formation began to falter as the fleet moved into the gravitational fields of nearby asteroids and planets. The Queen's fleet took advantage of the disruption. With precise timing, they fired back, disabling key enemy ships while avoiding unnecessary destruction. Each maneuver was calculated, deliberate, and executed flawlessly under Elias's guidance. The enemy, despite their superior numbers, could not adapt to the unpredictability of human strategy combined with the Queen's fleet discipline. After the engagement, the Queen called a private meeting with her advisors and with Elias. Representatives from the allied species who had observed the battle were present. Some whispered in disbelief. Others regarded Elias with cautious admiration. "You have once again proven your worth," the Queen said, her many eyes fixed on him. "Your actions have not only protected me but also demonstrated the capabilities of humanity. Others will take note. Others will reconsider their assumptions." Elias nodded, trying to maintain humility. "I do not seek recognition," he said. "I do what needs to be done. If we act clearly and decisively, problems can be solved. That is all." The Queen smiled faintly, a rare gesture. "Perhaps that is why you are Groom. You prepare the crown not with force alone, but with insight, skill, and understanding. You embody qualities that even the swarm has lost over centuries." In the following weeks, the Queen's fleet moved through the sector, repairing systems, strengthening defenses, and making diplomatic visits. Wherever they went, Elias's presence was noted. Species that had once dismissed humans as insignificant were now studying him closely. Envoys visited, hoping to learn from the human who could fix, adapt, and survive where others hesitated. Elias spent his days teaching, observing, and advising. He introduced methods for improving energy efficiency, enhancing shields, and recalibrating weapons systems. The Varelian engineers watched in amazement, taking notes and implementing adjustments. Humans approached problems differently. They did not rely solely on tradition or protocol. They experimented, adapted, and improvised. And in every success, Elias quietly demonstrated the strength of human ingenuity. One evening, as the Queen reviewed reports in her private chambers, Elias approached with a diagnostic tablet. "There is a minor fluctuation in the shield matrix," he said. "It is not critical, but if uncorrected, it could affect performance under heavy fire." The Queen studied him. "You notice what others do not," she said. "You anticipate problems before they appear. That is why you are Groom. You do not merely react. You prepare, prevent, and ensure continuity." Elias shrugged. "I do what I can. That is all anyone can do." Despite his modesty, the truth was clear. Humans were capable of changing outcomes, not through dominance or aggression, but through insight and action. The Queen recognized this, and so did those who observed her fleet. Then came a challenge unlike any before. A coalition of rival species, alarmed by the Queen's growing influence and human ingenuity, launched a coordinated strike on multiple sectors simultaneously. Their objective was clear: eliminate the Queen and disrupt the stability her presence brought to the region. The Queen's fleet prepared for engagement, but the scale of the attack was overwhelming. Ships moved in from multiple directions, targeting supply lines, communications, and the Queen's position. Panic could have spread among the crews, but Elias remained calm. He analyzed patterns, predicted movements, and devised a strategy that no Varelian commander would have conceived. "We cannot meet them directly," he told the Queen. "We need to use their coordination against them. Draw them into the asteroid belts and gravitational fields. Their formations will collapse under pressure. We can then strike with precision, minimizing risk to our fleet." The Queen nodded, issuing commands based on his guidance. The fleet moved, executing maneuvers that were unconventional but effective. Enemy formations broke apart, their attacks became uncoordinated, and the Queen's fleet responded with surgical strikes. Damage was inflicted efficiently, without unnecessary loss of life. Throughout the engagement, Elias coordinated every movement, every adjustment to shields, weapons, and engines. His human intuition, combined with the Queen's disciplined fleet, turned what could have been disaster into a decisive victory. The coalition's forces were scattered, their strategy disrupted, and their attempt to destabilize the sector had failed. After the battle, the Queen addressed her fleet. "Today, we have survived not because of numbers or weapons alone, but because of clarity, skill, and adaptability. Humans, who were once considered minor players, have demonstrated what can be achieved when intellect and action are combined. This is a lesson the galaxy will not forget." Elias, standing quietly to the side, felt a mix of pride and humility. He had not sought glory, and yet his actions had ensured victory. He had not sought recognition, and yet his presence had shifted perceptions across the stars. He was Groom, not because of status, but because he had fulfilled a role that required responsibility, skill, and insight. In the following weeks, diplomatic relations shifted. Species that had once doubted humanity began to seek cooperation, sending envoys to learn from the human who had stabilized the Queen's position. The Queen's own people began to adopt some of Elias's methods, blending human ingenuity with Varelian tradition. Slowly, a new approach emerged, one that valued observation, adaptability, and decisive action alongside established protocol. Elias continued his work, moving through the fleet, repairing systems, advising on strategy, and teaching new methods. He remained humble, focused only on the task at hand. Yet everywhere he went, he became a symbol of human capability, not through conquest, not through aggression, but through the quiet power of ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. One evening, as he stood on the observation deck, looking at the vast expanse of stars, the Queen approached. She did not speak at first, simply observing him. Then she said, "You have changed the way my people see the galaxy. You have shown that strength is not always in numbers or weapons, but in understanding, action, and foresight. That is why you are Groom." "Armor," Elias nodded. "I do what I can. Humans survive because we adapt. We do not dominate through force alone. We survive by observing, learning, and acting when necessary." The Queen's expression softened. "Perhaps that is why humans will endure. Not because they are the strongest, but because they are capable of change, of innovation, and of insight. You embody that, and that is why the galaxy must take notice." As the Queen departed, Elias remained on the deck, staring at the stars. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a simple repairman on a remote station to a human whose actions had shaped the course of empires. He realized that the galaxy was changing, slowly but surely, in response to human ingenuity. And in that realization, he felt a sense of quiet purpose. The word Groom had started as a mystery, a title he did not understand. Now, it was a reminder of responsibility, skill, and the quiet power humans carried. He had repaired a helmet, yes, But in doing so, he had repaired something far greater: the trust between species, the potential for cooperation, and the understanding that humans, when underestimated, could achieve remarkable feats. And so, Elias Ward continued his work. He repaired, he advised, he observed, and he acted. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was necessary. Humans, he realized, were capable of shaping history. Not through conquest, but through clarity, courage, and ingenuity. The galaxy had learned this lesson, and those who underestimated humanity would soon discover that the smallest actions, the quietest innovations, and the bravest decisions could change the course of entire civilizations. Elias looked out at the stars, feeling the hum of the Queen's ship beneath his feet, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, and the potential of humanity within his grasp. The galaxy was vast. Challenges were many. But he knew one thing with certainty: humans would endure, adapt, and thrive. And when they did, they would do so not as conquerors, but as creators, problem solvers, and unexpected heroes. The stars stretched on endlessly, but Elias felt ready. Whatever challenges awaited, whatever fleets or rival species approached, humans would face them with ingenuity, courage, and the quiet determination that had brought him this far. And somewhere, in the quiet of space, the word Groom lingered, a symbol of trust, responsibility, and the remarkable potential of humanity.